Hi, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Janice Kaminer-Resnick, and I welcome you on behalf of the leadership team here at America at a Crossroads. Along with me are former Congressman Mel Levine and former Los Angeles County Supervisor Xavier Slavsky. Tonight, we are honored to welcome first-time guest David Ignatius of the Washington Post to America at a Crossroads. We look forward to gaining your insights about tonight's topic, Behind the Headlines, America's Role in a Changing World. We also welcome our wonderful moderator, Larry Mantle. Thank you both for setting aside the time and your demanding schedules to be able to enlighten our very grateful audience. Looking ahead to next week, it's Thursday next week, not Wednesday. So please remember that. When you try to tune in on Wednesday, it won't work. June 5th at 5 p.m., we'll have Wesleyan University's president, Michael Roth, in conversation with Pat Morrison, speaking about campus unrest, the use and abuse of anti-Semitism, a university president's perspective. In tonight's email, you'll receive two articles that might pique your interest about Michael Roth. One is from the Forward and was written this past Passover. In this column, Michael Roth writes about the challenges he encountered as a Jewish campus president while navigating the Israel-Gaza related protests on his campus. The second piece is an op-ed column written by Michael Roth and published in last month's New York Times entitled "Trump is Selling Jews a Dangerous Lie." In this column, Michael Roth sharply challenges President Trump's contention that his crackdown on colleges and universities is an effort to address or curb anti-Semitism. In Roth's words, the crackdowns and punitive measures to universities pose a direct threat to the very people they purport to help. Be sure to join us next week. It should be a very interesting and important conversation. Finally, we truly appreciate your donations and support of our programs. It is only through your support, both via your attendance and your financial contributions, that we can continue our programming. So thank you. Now, without further ado, please welcome my colleague and friend, Mel Levine, who will introduce tonight's guest and moderator. Mel?
Thanks very much, Janice. It gives me special pleasure to introduce David Ignatius to our audience. David is a very longtime friend of mine initially to his friendship since college with Jan Levine. We met 55 years ago or something like that. It's been a while. And since that time, David has really distinguished himself as one of the preeminent columnists in the country and beyond. David is a prize-winning columnist for the Washington Post, where he has been for the past 40 years. During most of that tenure, David has the Middle East and the CIA as his subject. He continues to write twice a week foreign affairs column, and in my view, and I think that's shared by just about everyone I know, no one has more credibility on these subjects than David. David has served as executive editor of the International Herald Tribune in Paris and cut his journalistic teeth as a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. He has also found time to write a dozen novels, several of which were New York Times bestsellers, and one of which, Body of Lies, was made into a very popular and compelling movie starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Russell Crowe. I won't begin to try to outline his many honors. He's received too many of them for outstanding journalism than one could include in a brief introduction. So we warmly welcome David on his first appearance at America at a Crossroads. He will be interviewed by our wonderful moderator, Larry Mantle, who I'm not sure everybody knows this yet. A number of times he's been interviewing our guests. Larry is a fourth generation Angelino, something that distinguishes him from most Angelinos. He has been the host of AirTalk, an NPR affiliate, for an astonishing 41 years. Larry's show is the longest continuously running daily talk program in Southern California, and probably far beyond that. Larry has won numerous awards himself, and we are extremely fortunate and grateful that he is among our regular interviewers at American Crossroads. Larry, the platform is yours.
Mel, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be back. Janice and Zev, thank you as well. It's always an honor to get to talk to the remarkable guests that are booked each week for America at a Crossroads. Just to underscore what Janice said, next week it's Thursday evening. I'll repeat the specifics at the end of our program tonight, but just to remind you, if you build your Wednesday evenings around these, as I know many people do, you just have to delay that until Thursday of next week. Also, Janice said at the outset, because of our tight time, that we wouldn't be hearing where people are from. But I hope that as you ask questions of David Ignatius tonight, putting those in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen, that you do include your location if you're of a mind to. It helps us, along with your first name, just to share where the question is coming from, because obviously we have viewers from across the United States and in many parts of the world. David, it's so good to talk with you, and welcome to your first appearance on America at a Crossroads.
But thank you, Larry. It's great to be here. Thanks to Janice and special thanks to Mel. We are old friends. I can remember sitting around Mel's dinner table in Washington when he was a member of Congress and thinking, being a congressman is just the coolest thing there is. We would talk about everything around the country, around the world. I'm not sure any member of Congress would feel that way these days, but it did seem like kind of a golden age, and it's great to be with Mel and with all of you.
David, before we get into the big topics of the evening, which are, of course, Ukraine and Russia and what's happening in the Middle East, I did want to share some breaking news with our viewers. A federal trade court has blocked President Trump from imposing the sweeping tariffs on imports under the Emergency Powers Law. The three-judge panel at the New York-based Court of International Trade issued its ruling after several lawsuits arguing the president had exceeded his authority. The worldwide and retaliatory tariff orders exceeded any authority granted to the president by IEEPA to regulate importation by means of tariffs. So reads the ruling of the court. That reference in the acronym is to the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act. There's been no immediate response from the White House. This has just come down. At least 7 lawsuits have been filed challenging the tariffs that President Trump has attempted to enact. David, I just want to ask you first thing about this. One of numerous legal setbacks the Trump administration has faced. Your thoughts about this one on trade?
So, I think the pushback on trade really came from the financial markets. I'm glad that the courts are coming into the fight also. I've been impressed by the range of legal actions, rebuffing, delaying, enjoining actions by Trump that seemed to me, when they were announced, to be illegal, certainly inappropriate. Here's another example. But on trade, I think it's the world's reaction and the reaction of financial market traders that has had the decisive impact and has already forced Trump to pull back a lot of what he initially announced.
Well, I wonder too about the importance of the bond market, seeing how it's responded to the threats of tariffs and then, walking those back. And then, the bond markets, which are so essential, seem every bit as important, if not more so, than how the stock market has responded. Your thoughts on that?
So when I say financial markets, I meant to include both, equities and bonds. I think what we've been seeing in the financial markets is an increasing wariness of anything that's branded United States of America, which is frightening. The idea that the U.S. dollar, U.S. businesses, which used to carry an enormous premium, are now beginning to be discounted, should worry all of us. Maybe as people look at the continued vitality of our courts, the ability of courts to come in and rule in a way that upholds the rule of law, it may make brand America look a little better. I hope so.
We also had news that was made. It seems to happen on these America to Crossroads. We get big news made just before we come on air Also, late today, Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced that Chinese students' visas to study in the U.S. are being revoked en masse. Your thoughts on that?
So I think a lot of our our secret in the United States has been our ability to draw the smartest graduate students from around the world, including China. It's a counterintelligence um, problem because some of those students are touched either before, during, or after their time at American universities by the Ministry of State Security, the Chinese intelligence agency. There are lots of examples of that. It's a tough problem for universities to vet. The universities shouldn't be the FBI. The idea of banning en masse every smart Chinese student to Harvard, Stanford, MIT are prepared to admit, seems to me the chainsaw approach. I have in my mind an image of Elon Musk with his chainsaw. That's not the way to do anything. It's certainly not the way to do university admissions. And I just think it's one of the biggest weaknesses of Trump policy is that there are problems like Chinese students and being sure that they're not taking important intellectual property with them. But there are ways to do it and ways not to do it. And this strikes me as a way not to do it.
Putin is crazy and playing with fire. Not my words, but President Trump's from his weekend posts on Truth Social. Do you think Trump is truly surprised that Putin's seemingly uninterested in a ceasefire?
I think he imagined that by reaching out to Putin, ending his isolation. Remember, at the time Putin got his phone call from Trump, he had been charged with war crimes by the International Criminal Court, and here's Trump in effect offering him a unilateral pardon. I think he did imagine that Putin would be so glad to be embraced by his friend Donald that he would immediately move toward winding down the war. In thinking that, he made a fundamental mistake. He just misunderstood how important this is to Putin. I think Putin has disrespected Trump. If I wrote the other day, if I'd loved a tweet from Trump that said, "I told you starting in January that if you didn't come to peace negotiations in earnest, I would impose tariffs. You disrespected me in my presidency. Big mistake in capital letters, Trump style." And he's done versions of that to really. Get tough with Russia takes you down a road that I suspect Trump doesn't want to go down. So my own expectation, sadly, is that he'll probably end up walking away from a confrontation with Putin, walking away from this effort he made to try to bring peace in Ukraine. The Ukraine war is such a tragedy. It's so violent. His instinct that it's time to end this bloodbath. He always uses that phrase, the bloodbath in Ukraine. He's right. It is time to end it. And I thought he stood a chance in a way that Biden didn't. And I'm just, we'll see. It's not over yet. But I just was talking to one of the best Russia analysts in the world today at lunch, and she said. Putin's commitment to this war is so powerful. Almost nothing that Trump would do will get him to drop his basic demand that Ukraine no longer align with the West.
Trump indicated that he had protected Putin and Russia from extreme damage. He wasn't explicit, but perhaps banking sanctions or what he's referencing there. If Trump went so far as to put the most extreme sanctions on Russian banks that he could and transactions, how much pain would that inflict on the Russian economy and on associates of Putin?
Associates of Putin have been damaged. I think he's working on a new set of associates now who have been directly part of the war machine. People are making substantial money in this Russian war economy, but I think they're different people than the earlier class of oligarchs. The energy business, which has been the Russian cash cow, isn't as good a business as it was as oil prices go down. I think that that may have more of an effect on Putin than the financial sanctions. But as we all know from reading our history, Russians are good at dealing with hardship. This war has already it caused significant problems for the Russian economy, but people are hunkering down. Putin's as popular as ever. I'm tempted to say more popular than ever. The financial incentive to serve in the Russian military is enormous for poor Russians, especially in these ethnic areas, the Chechens, Dagestanis. If they have five sons and one of them goes off to serve, the bonus that one son who's serving gets is enough to buy the family a new apartment, to put them on easy street. And a lot of families, I'm told, but push us that one of their sons out to get this bonus. So I think. I'm all for sanctions. I think the thing that will make the difference for Ukraine is the continued reliable supply of U.S. weapons and intelligence, especially the latter. If the intelligence is cut off, Ukraine is blind. It can't see over the horizon. It doesn't. They've just been in Kyiv, under ballistic missile attack, and not having early warning. You only get 5 to 8 minutes warning, but at least allows you to get to shelter. If that warning is cut off, Ukraine is really going to suffer.
I think it was in one of your columns, and forgive me if I'm citing someone else, but I think you were writing about, things are so tough though for Russia, they're actually turning to North Korean troops, which, tells you it's not an infinite supply.
It's not an infinite supply. It was interesting that they felt they needed to go outside. The North Koreans suffered severe casualties, as the Russians have. But I just today had an account that I thought was reliable from this Russia analyst that manpower is not Putin's problem. It's a problem for Ukraine, but it's not currently for Russia.
All right. Zelensky proposed a trilateral meeting where he and Putin and Trump would sit down. Is there any way in the world you could imagine Putin sitting for such a meeting?
I think he might sit for such a meeting for show. He loathes Zelensky, and one of his fundamental demands is that Zelensky goes. And I think one of the things that Trump and J.D. Vance have done is to explore other possible Ukrainian politicians who might succeed him. Play that game. But I can imagine him doing it as part of a broader effort to try to get Trump on his side. I fear that this war is going to go on for a good long while. When I was in Kyiv, I gave a speech in which I argued that what I call strategic pessimism, which was a fancy way of saying assume the worst, is probably the wise course for Ukraine. Assume that the negotiations will fail. Assume that Trump will walk away. Assume that Russia will keep fighting, and then how are you going to keep going? I mean, don't hope for the best. Assume the worst, and if they can answer that question, they have a chance. Certainly, when it comes to bravery, I've rarely seen a country in my lifetime stand up the way that Ukraine has.
David, is there any way that you think Putin would accept terms for a ceasefire or for a lasting peace that in which Russia did not keep the territories that it's currently militarily controlling?
No, I think Russia will not leave those territories voluntarily, and it will be some time before Ukraine, sometime if ever, before Ukraine has the military strength to push them out. I think Ukrainians have accepted that those four oblasts plus Crimea are, for now, de facto in Russian hands and that they can't stop that. I think they'd actually accept a settlement that's premised on that, much as South Korea ended up accepting a settlement that divided the country. They want to be part of Europe. I mean, the part of Ukraine that remains Ukraine wants to be a European country. And I think that's really what this war is about. That's what's intolerable to Putin. He doesn't want a European country on his border. He has this sort of mystical idea of Ukraine as part of the Russian soul. It's not an imperial idea so much as a religious one. And I think letting Ukraine go its way toward the West is something Putin still isn't ready to accept. He sees it as they talk about denazification of Ukraine, which never makes any sense. I mean, Zelensky's Jewish. What do you mean denazification? And I think by that, Nazism is a code for anti-Russian. The Great War for Russia was against the Nazis in Germany. So when he says denazification, he means anti-Russian platform status. And I think that's the thing that Putin is not going to give up, and Trump and all the people in the administration haven't really begun to reckon with how serious his commitment is to that.
Not to relitigate all what's come before in Ukraine with Russia, but Trump's blamed Obama and Biden for the war in Ukraine, particularly Obama's response to the invasion of Crimea. But do you think any of that blame is justified? Do our U.S. leaders bear some degree of responsibility, or is this just outright Russian aggression and there's not much we could have done?
So the invasion in February 2022 is on Putin. The idea that we're to blame for that strikes me as just fundamentally wrong. If anything, the Biden administration, the head of CIA, Bill Burns, were the Paul Revere's trying to wake up Europe and to some extent Ukraine itself to the Russian threat. I mean, our intelligence warning, our understanding of what the Russians were preparing to do was extraordinary. I think the blameworthy part is Obama's non-response to Russia's seizure of Crimea in 2014, and then its assault on the Donbass, as it's called, the eastern slice of Ukraine, which essentially went unchallenged. Looking back, that was a terrible mistake. And having seen that, I think it was a mistake, looking back, not to have U.S. troops in Ukraine, training Ukrainian military, but in Ukraine on that day in February 2022 when Russia came over the border. I think it would have made a difference if we'd shown that kind of commitment. But I think that the real mistake in not responding was the 2014 one.
If Russia, though it's sort of called that step by the U.S. to have training troops in Ukraine, and the U.S. then doesn't respond itself militarily because Ukraine's, not a member of NATO, would that have made the U.S. somehow look weaker, or would that have left the U.S. without any place to go if Russia had still invaded?
I think it would have checked Russia's ambitions. It would have been a statement by the United States, but before rather than after how seriously it took Russian aggression. I'm just trying to. I mean, this war has been so devastating, and the effects will last so long that I'm haunted by what could have been done to have forestalled it. What different approach? And that's the most important one I can think of. If we'd have had troops on the ground, it's a kind of tripwire, and it says don't in a louder voice, more emphatic voice than we used.
If you could dictate how the president responds now, what do you think would be the strongest thing, the best thing that Donald Trump could do to support Ukraine and to bring about some degree of peace?
So I'd love it if Donald Trump said tomorrow, Vladimir, you've made a terrible mistake. You misjudged me, and you're going to pay a penalty for that mistake. It's going to be in several parts. The first part is additional sanctions, and then you figure out what those would be. They could be banking sanctions, a range of things, and then you'd say the United States is going to not only continue its supply of arms and intelligence to Ukraine, but it's going to increase that supply. And we're going to do additional things. We're going to devote new resources to making interceptors to protect Ukraine's skies. And we're going to do everything we can to make sure that Ukrainians don't uh, go to bed every night waiting for the air raid sirens that tell them their cities are being bombed. If he did that, I think it would make Putin realize that he is in a long war that's going to cost him more than he imagined, and it would give heart to Ukrainians. They are suffering, and they're going to this war, as I said, this war isn't going to stop. Suffering is going to increase, but they'll at least know that they have the United States and Europe standing with them.
David, you wrote a piece that was posted on the Washington Post site just before we came on this evening, and it was about the mounting criticism of Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu, the lack of a plan, or at least a plan that seems to be leading towards some degree of peace and a determination of how Gaza is going to be governed going forward. Please elaborate on, particularly about how moderate Arab nations are becoming more and more frustrated with Israel.
So it was a painful piece to write, as every piece about the Gaza war is. I opened with something that happened today, which was that the Israeli ambassador to the UAE, friend of Prime Minister Netanyahu's, was summoned by the UAE Foreign Ministry and given essentially a rebuke, formal diplomatic rebuke, because of actions that have been taken Monday in Jerusalem at the Al-Aqsa Mosque complex, where extremist Israelis heckled and are said to have assaulted Palestinians who were at Al-Aqsa, and the UAE protested that. The reason that that's important is that the UAE, in I think a lot of ways, has been the most important friend Israel's had in the Arab world. The UAE had the guts to start the Abraham Accords with Israel, which I thought were great. I thought, allowing Israel to be part of this region in a full, meaningful way, opening real relations. I just was at a conference in Abu Dhabi with many Israelis who were there, and a strongly pro-Israel organization that organized it. That's amazing that's now happened. But I fear that the war in Gaza is putting good things like that, good things for Israel, at risk. It's unusual for any country to summon an ambassador, and that came on top of last week. You had Britain, France, and Canada with a unusually sharply worded criticism of Israel, saying that Israel, in withholding food from Gaza, was engaging in egregious conduct, was one of the phrases in that statement. And then this week you had Ehud Olmert, the former prime minister of Israel, in an op-ed in Haaretz, astonishingly accusing Netanyahu and his government of war crimes. I'm quoting the former prime minister. He said, "This is a war without purpose." That's in his judgment. The Gaza war, the military goals in Gaza have been achieved, and it's being continued for political reasons, not military reasons. That accords with my own reporting. I talk often to Israeli military and intelligence officials, and for more than a year, I've been hearing from senior IDF officials that their military goals in the Gaza war had been achieved. And then they have come up with detailed plans for how Gaza would be administered in what we call the day after the conflict ends, in a way that Hamas would no longer be the political power and control, would no longer terrorize Israelis and Palestinian civilians, and you'd have a different Gaza. So there's been a roadmap. I've gone over it in great detail with my Israeli friends, and it's just heartbreaking to me that Netanyahu, again, I think for political reasons, to keep his coalition together, has not been willing to go down that road. So that's where we end up. And my column today was just summarizing what a it's a terrible situation for Israel.
David, could you elaborate a bit on what that roadmap is that military officials see for some sort of an independent body to lead Gaza in an interim period at least?
So IDF leaders of the Shin Bet Security Service, the former Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant in particular, worked with two key partners in developing a plan for administering Gaza in the day after. The two partners were the United States, Brett McGurk, the NSC director for the Middle East, and the UAE, the country I was just talking about, is Israel's most important Arab friend. Ron Dermer, as I wrote in a column a year ago, sat in Abu Dhabi with McGurk and with the UAE foreign minister, Sheikh Abdullah, and they came up with a plan for Gaza that had basically the following elements. The Palestinian Authority would invite countries in the Arab world and in Europe to assist in a process of stabilizing Gaza. And those countries would provide troops and money for reconstruction. The Palestinian Authority would be a kind of umbrella for the recruitment of a Palestinian security force that would be trained by the United States. People don't realize this, but we've had for years a three-star general in Jerusalem just getting ready to train the security force that would end the or reduce the Palestinian threat to Israel as they move toward a two-state solution. So that was being teed up. The training sites for the security force in Jordan were being ready to discuss with Jordanian officials. So the whole, it was not just a pipe dream, it was a quite detailed plan. The countries that would contribute troops in Europe and around the Arab world were enumerated. They had been asked, they'd given assurances. So that's what Netanyahu walked away from. And as I've indicated, I think it was a terrible mistake. It led to suffering for Palestinians, but I think the Israelis lost an opportunity to stabilize Gaza in a way that's really important for Israel. I have this fear that this war has created a Somalia on Israel's border without any clear idea of how order and stability are going to be maintained there. I mean, no wonder we've come to the idea of forcible expulsion of the Palestinian population. I mean, it's going to be a festering mess until somebody, thinks clearly about how you create Palestinian governance, and you can't do that without the Palestinian Authority.
Well, but looking at the Palestinian Authority, the lack of credibility that it has with Palestinians, and I mean, who would be the representative? Would you get buy-in of Gazans to having the PA leading that international entity? Would it even have the potential, in your view, of rehabilitating the PA if it was able to effectively bring the parties together and provide some sort of transition for Gaza?
So you're right. If the PA is a mess, it's corrupt, it's mistrusted. I mean, I've traveled the West Bank, village to village, north to south, and everywhere you go, people regard the PA as, a bunch of thieves, basically. But even the most corrupt organization can be reformed if real effort is put into it. And that's been the plan. The phrase that the Biden administration used was the RPA, the Reformed Palestinian Authority. People might think, that's just a fantasy, but knowing the people who would have done the training, both in the U.S. military and in the Jordanian GID intelligence service and their military. These are competent people. That they have strong militaries. They know how to train people. So I don't regard that as a fantasy. As I say, I regard it as a missed opportunity.
We have so many great viewer questions, and I want to ask you before we conclude. I'll try and get back to this about essentially the Trump administration's moving away from international agreements, from American soft power being exercised in the world. And I'm interested in your thoughts on that. But let me get some viewer questions. Ruth in Minnesota says, given that Trump has been attempting to defy court rulings, what are the chances that he'll just defy this latest one that's come from the trade courts about his implementation of tariffs?
Well, I'm sure he'll challenge it. The I've thought for a while that the constitutional crisis that we all worry about will come if Trump defies a ruling by the Supreme Court. I mean, he'll uh, appeal these rulings, and he may continue with his behavior until there's resolution at the top level. But we're heading toward the moment where the court will rule on the extent of presidential power. It'll be a landmark case in our history. It's hard to predict with confidence where the court will come down, but the indications to me over the last 6 months have been 4 months, I should say, have been positive, and so I'm assuming that the court will uphold limits on presidential power. The tariffs, I mean, it's hard for me to imagine that the president doesn't have authority to declare tariffs. That seems well within the scope of executive power. I don't like them. I think they're a mistake for the economy, but the idea that it's illegal to do it, I'm not sure I'm ready to sign on to that. As I say, that what's going to stop the tariffs is the reaction of the stock and bond markets.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you about this trade court decision because I was under the impression that presidents have historically had significant latitude on tariffs, but I know it's a very complicated area of law.
If I pretended to understand uh, legal rules involving tariffs, I would be lying to all of your viewers, so I won't. As I say, the issue in all of these areas, the attack on law firms, the attack on Harvard and other universities, just go down the list of all the things Trump has been doing. The question is, what are the limits on executive power? And there is an argument that the executive power is essentially unlimited. Seem to be some members of the Supreme Court who embrace that, but I don't think there's a majority. And I think we'll see where the limits are. Some of these things will end up probably being legal, and I think tariffs are one. Others won't be.
What do you think about Harvard pushing back on the president's demands? Some of the law firms that hadn't acquiesced to Trump's demands about what work they'll take on or not. Some are pushing back as well. I don't know that they're the biggest firms that have the most government contracts, but nonetheless, it does appear that there is growing resistance institutionally to the president. Do you see it that way?
I do. I think people are finding their backbone. I wish more of them were members of the U.S. Senate. But we live in hope. So I'm a graduate of Harvard College, and I'm really proud of Harvard. I think it's appropriate for Harvard as our oldest, wealthiest. I want to say best, but that's problematic. University to stand up. Others can't afford it. Harvard can, in every way, financially, and in terms of its stability. Similarly with law firms, I said to the head of one of the major law firms did show some courage in resisting Trump, but it's a terrible potential danger for the firm. On your dying day, you'll be glad you did this. And I think these are issues of that consequence. The institutions and the people who run them, who had the courage to stand up and take the hit, and the hit will be huge. I think we'll be grateful for them, and they'll feel they did the right thing. Always.
EA from Santa Paula in Southern California asked the question I was actually going to ask you is about soft power. Do you think President Trump's actions have eroded U.S. soft power as well as U.S. credibility, access to intelligence, national security, and that power is instead accrued to our enemies like Russia and China?
So I do think that the brand United States of America has been severely damaged. I think whether the Trump administration rules that foreign students can't come or can come is less important than foreign students are less likely to come. I mean, they'll feel this isn't a safe place for them. This isn't an environment in which they can do their best work. They'll feel threatened. I think we forget just how precious the country's reputation for freedom, openness, rule of law, protection of individual rights, the things that are under threat with this administration, how valuable that is. I feel the same way about our alliances that Trump has been so capricious with. I mean, I think our strength as a country derives in part from the fact that we have such good friends. We have strong, stable countries across Europe. Japan is one of my absolute favorite allies. Name a crisis where Japan isn't there supporting us in whatever ways it can. So, dissing people overseas, undermining our values, I think it's just going to hurt the country, and it's going to take a long time to recover. I'm sorry to say.
Mary asks, how much power and influence do you think Stephen Miller has? And is he the one who's been most influential, particularly with the Secretary of State's actions?
So the inner workings, the wiring diagram of the Trump administration, the Trump White House, I wish I had it. I've been trying as a journalist to figure that out. I mean, is Stephen Miller the chief commissar? When I think his name was Peter Morocco was taking apart USAID, he was sort of sent over to do that. Who did he report back to? Who in the White House was giving him guidance? Maybe it was Stephen Miller. It's hard to imagine Stephen Miller doing all the different things that the Trump administration has done. But that's a reporting challenge for me, is to figure out, as I say, the order of battle. How are they managing this campaign?
Well, and I wonder if part of the challenge is whether the players keep changing so regularly, who has Trump's ear at any given time, that even if you came up with a flow chart of that, it would, 48 hours later might be substantially different.
I think it does change. Some of the core people remain. It's obvious that a couple of key people are Vice President J.D. Vance. People who like to watch Wolf Hall. I sometimes ask myself, who's the Thomas Cromwell who has the king's ear? And I think my answer is J.D. Vance. I don't mean to say that they have similar values, but I think J.D. Vance is very smart, a very clever operator. I think Donald Trump Jr. I mean, as Jared Kushner and his wife Ivanka were to the first Trump administration, I think Don Jr. is to this second Trump administration. He's the family consigliere. He's the one who exerts influence in all sorts of subtle ways through his network of people. But as I say, look for a column from me that actually answers the question you posed, as opposed to kind of talking around it in a month or so.
Steve in Los Angeles says, I heard a talk by a former Israeli ambassador who said that President Biden knew Hamas was stealing humanitarian aid to Gazan civilians and selling that aid to finance its terrorism. Is that true? Do you think that Biden knew that?
When we say Biden knew that, the question is, did U.S. intelligence know that and provide that information? I assume that you mean after October 7, after the war began, it's probably a safe bet that Hamas was stealing aid as it came in. The whole process of distribution of aid has been one of the things that troubled me. I'll never forget that scene that was shot from a drone over a convoy that was arriving in Gaza, and the people below, looking like like ants almost, scrambling around this convoy, just desperate to loot food, to pull it off the trucks. Hamas controls some of it. The gangs and clans that have been a part of how Gaza's run for forever, people tell me, also play a key role. It's just, it's one of those things where you try to imagine, what if that was me and my family trying to survive, trying to deal with the gangs, the thugs from Hamas. I hate Hamas. I will underline that. I've been covering the Middle East long enough to feel I'd be happy if they never governed anything again. But, I think it's just as you try to imagine what it would be like to keep a family alive, it's a nightmare.
I'm going to combine a couple of questions that are similar. Dr. Nancy uh, Nancy in Chevy Chase, Maryland, asks how Putin can remain so popular if the number of soldiers dying that we hear is accurate. And Judge Joe in Los Angeles, do you think one of the reasons Putin is still so popular is they have censored media, and Putin is able to set the story, tell the narrative he wants to tell, much like Trump attempts to gaslight Americans? That's from Judge Joe.
Well, those are great questions. Just to underline what the cost has been for Russia, the latest estimate is that about 800,000 Russians have been killed or wounded in the 3 years of this war. That's more than Russia lost in all the wars it fought since 1945 combined. And it's just an enormous number. So how, with that terrible carnage, does Putin remain popular? And I'm sorry to say that I think the Russian people have bought into the idea, sort of paranoid idea that Putin has, that the West is out to get him. That, this is really the West ganging up on us. I always think of Russia, the Russian symbol is the eagle, double-headed eagle facing two ways. I think of it facing east and west. And the Western facing, part of the eagle, the aspiration to be European, modern, keeps getting trounced by the Eastern facing, the part of Russia that's paranoid, that feels unwanted, that has a chip on its shoulder. And Putin has been brilliant at speaking to that part of the Russian narrative. He's this thing he's best at. And people obviously are buying it. It's tragic, but I think they are buying it.
David, what's the extension of that narrative? Is it that the West really wants to take Russian oil resources? I mean, there has to be a reason given or assumed for what the West would really do to exploit Russia. And so what is the extension of that narrative?
So if you're Putin, but I suspect also if you're Russian, you have a memory, either personal or your family history of a country that was an empire. I mean, I remember going to the Soviet Union and sitting in my hotel room and watching these goofy television spectaculars where they'd have dancers from Azerbaijan and singers from Uzbekistan and you know whatever ballet dancers from the Baltic states, and it was part of this union, this all Soviet Union, be on TV every night, and it was an imperial an idea of imperial Russia. And I think that was comforting to Russians. They felt it was part of what their birthright. And now that it's gone, there's this, imagine what Americans would feel like if chunks of the United States that, we acquired over time suddenly weren't part of the U.S. We'd be pretty angry. So I think that's a part of what's going on here.
So it's a kind of grieving the loss of the former Soviet Union, it sounds like you're
Yes,
saying.
it's, Putin has described famously that the breakup of the Soviet Union is the greatest disaster in modern history. That's the way he sees it. He thinks that bigger Russia was able to counterbalance the West, that adventures the United States embarked on in the period when it was the only superpower were unfortunate for everybody, including the U.S., but he would cite the invasion of Iraq, the war in Afghanistan. Those were things that Soviet power might have checked, but Russian power couldn't. So in his view, the world became unbalanced, and I'm putting the best gloss on Putinism, but he's been saying this for a long time. I was in Munich for the Munich Security Conference in 2007 when he basically said, um, the post-Cold War period is over. We're going to start fighting back, and he just laid it out. This has been destructive for my country. It's been destructive for the world. It was like a hush went over the auditorium. People gasped, because he was kind of declaring war on the West. It was 2007. It's accelerated every year, and now we're in this incredible bloody war that, as I say, it's not going to end soon.
Peter in Santa Monica asked, will the U.S.-Ukraine rare earth mineral mining agreement give Trump a reason to help Ukraine take back Russian-occupied territories militarily?
So that's the rationale for it, as I think your viewer knows. Much of this mineral wealth is in the eastern area that Russia now occupies. So if you're serious about harvesting the revenues from exploitation, you'd have to reconquer the territory. I don't think that's going to happen soon. And to be honest, I don't think this agreement, although I think in the end it's something that's good for Ukraine. It gives the United States skin in the game. I don't think it's going to be a significant commercial enterprise. I think what's going to bind the United States to Ukraine is not that agreement, but the political commitment by President Trump, if he's willing to make it, to continue to supply weapons and intelligence no matter what.
I'm going to try and get through as many questions the next few minutes, questions that in an ideal world you take 3 minutes to answer, but if you could do
I'll
it like a
answer more
lightning
quickly.
round. All right. Robin in Bethesda, Maryland, could the Trump administration use frozen Russian assets for either Ukraine military aid or humanitarian aid?
It could use those assets for both. The objections, I think, are principally from European countries, Belgium in particular, where a lot of these assets are said to be held. I think there's growing pressure from the Senate, where Lindsey Graham's rounded up this veto-proof 81 people for sanctions. Growing pressure to seize those assets and use the assets to help Ukraine. So I think it's a good idea, and I think it's going to happen.
We have David and Mina, as well as other viewers who ask, do you think Germany and other Western European nations will increase their aid to Ukraine if Trump walks away?
Yes. I think one of the really encouraging things that's happened is that Europe has realized that its future is at stake, that this big, menacing Russia, without the United States as a check, it will threaten Europe as a whole, will threaten the security balance in Europe. So Europeans are deciding they're going to fight back. They're significantly increasing their defense budgets. Germany, under Chancellor Merz, has said it will go to 5% of its GDP in defense spending. That's amazing for Germany. Merz has said we will create the biggest, strongest army in continental Europe. Once upon a time, we would have gone, Germany. We really now it's that sounds like the best thing that could happen for Ukraine. Germany is saying it's going to send, hasn't officially said this, but it's signaling it's going to send Taurus missiles to Ukraine. Taurus missiles can strike Moscow. I mean, Germany's really got the bit in its teeth now. These are significant, potentially dangerous actions. And I've been amazed that Merz, and I could go through a whole list of countries, but Germany is the most interesting example. Yeah, they are standing up.
Terrence, I'm sorry, a number of viewers have asked just simply, why has Trump been so soft on Putin?
Well, that's the great mystery, isn't it? I tend not to believe the super conspiratorial version. Trump is somehow under control of the Russians. I think he's been a Russophile in many aspects of his life. In his personal life, he's married two women from Eastern Europe. Since the late 1980s, he's been obsessed with doing business deals in Russia. He's been extraordinarily unsuccessful. But he's always seen Russia as a gold mine personally. Russians, buy up his Trump Towers, properties in Florida, all over. But beyond that, I can't explain it. There's an affinity he obviously has for oligarchs, and he likes Kim Jong-un, he likes Xi Jinping, he likes Erdogan in Turkey, and he likes Putin. Why? We don't have enough time to psychoanalyze him.
Judy in Los Angeles, and this is our final question we have time for, and I feel so badly. There's so many great questions from viewers, but asks, is really the motivation of Bibi, of Netanyahu, staying out of prison, and that's why he's doing in Gaza what he's doing now?
So that's not something that I would endorse. I've known Netanyahu for many years. I think his personality has been affected very negatively by politics, but I think he does have deep beliefs and commitments as an Israeli, so let's not forget that by staying in the game with all the horrors of the Gaza war, he has essentially destroyed the power of Hezbollah in Lebanon. That's a good thing. He has contributed to the departure of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. That's a good thing. And he's significantly weakened the power of Iran. That's also a good thing, in my view. So, by staying in the game, he has done significant things to the benefit of Israel. He has not been able to, can't even think about how to end the war in Gaza, and that's what I talked about earlier. But I don't want to diminish the things he's done for the security of Israel as prime minister, and that's not about staying out of jail. I think there's a deep motivation. I'm not a fan, but I don't want to pretend that he's simply a creature of personal ambition.
And yet, of course, the intense suffering that you've witnessed goes on in Gaza, and for whatever reason, Hamas is not releasing the remaining hostages that it holds, and we all look on in horror at what we see unfolding there. David, this has been just a very educational hour. Thank you so much for weighing in on this. Just if you wouldn't mind taking maybe 30 seconds for a closing thought as we wrap up tonight's program.
So these are such great questions. And I knew they would be when my friend Mel Levine asked me to do this. I worry about our country, and I am encouraged when I'm involved in conversations like this with people who care about where we are, where we're going, who have the sort of civic spirit that I think is part of what holds the country together. So I'm really happy to have been with you tonight. They were great questions. I wish, some of you should go into the business of writing columns. I suspect maybe you already are. But thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
David, thanks very much. And we're actually going to be sending out to everyone who's subscribed to these America to Crossroads program a link to your column that you posted this evening about Israel and the loss of any sort of support in the moderate Arab world and what this means. Thank you again for joining us, David. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you.
Thanks so much. And David really said so well the reasons to support these programs. America at a Crossroads is a nonprofit initiative of Jews United for Democracy and Justice. Janice has done such a wonderful job of curating these programs with the support of Zev and Mel. Those of us that moderate these programs understand how fortunate we are to get to lead these conversations with the tremendous guests that come to us each week. So please make your contribution right now so that these programs are able to continue, so that thousands of people are able to watch them live or watch them later on the YouTube channel devoted to America to Crossroads. You can go to the website JewsUnitedForDemocracy.org. That's JewsUnitedForDemocracy.org to make your contribution. We thank you for that. And I remind you again, next week's program will not be on the typical night of the week. It'll be Thursday next week. So build your regular routine that you do on this night of the week for Thursday of next week. That's June 5th. The guest will be Wesleyan University President Michael Roth in conversation with my good friend Pat Morrison. The title is The Use and Abuse of Anti-Semitism, a University President's Perspective. For all of us at America to Crossroads, we wish you a very good evening.